HDC has made a recommendation. I spoke with the chair a couple of times since our last meeting, and it seems pretty straightforward. Their idea, which is probably apparent if you look through the packet of materials, was to try to stop having as many split parcels and having as many parcels where the district just crossed the edge of a property like a corner, and as a result it was in, so they tried to remove those. One parcel down off of Middle Road,
9 Middle Road.
I reviewed that in particular, and it appears that wasn't supposed to have been included.
Oh,
So that's a mistake.
because I was gonna complain about that.
You have a letter from them.
Oh, yeah, I've read
We
it.
have a letter
I've
from
had
the
that
owner.
letter for a while.
Map 152, lot 47. The idea was if properties fronted Middle Street, Lafayette Road, they should come in, and that one doesn't. I actually checked, not just the GIS, I checked, there's a survey of it, and it doesn't abut, so.
And it's on Middle Road, not Middle Street, so.
Exactly, it's on Middle Road. Now, that's a funky intersection, as we know, and the district's a little bit.
But I would think now with the newer change where you have to come all the way out, now it's really on Middle Road versus.
It's further away, and the other thing Reagan, the chair, and I spoke about, there are other changes that we might want to talk about as the master plan proceeds, and we get some more input from, the consultants. But this was based on the HDC's experience with having so many people coming in, and like, you have to look at my house, even though it's, this corner of my property that just touches, so they're having issues and variances and problematic things. So that's the explanation. It seems pretty straightforward to me, other than that one removal. But
So with that, there'll be no ads, no properties are added.
In entirety.
In
It would just be adjusting, either
Split
removing it
lots.
from or including in its entirety.
I think that was the only ad, wasn't it?
That was the only ad
Only one
completely
in
that was
green.
not in the district.
So would it be like no additional people affected by the zoning or the?
There'll be some that are coming out. Actually, several that are coming out.
All the orange up here will be removed.
Yeah.
And then the yellow are currently in, but they're
They're gonna include the whole lot.
I saw there was a long list of people getting taken out, but no one's getting.
Which, when you have a split lot like that, how would you deal with it now? Would they, if they built on the backside that's not on the
I
HDC,
think
would
you're
they?
right. I think if it touches the building, we include.
Touches the building.
You have to comply. The whole
Okay.
building has to.
And some of
Okay.
those split parcels are already in, like that one with a sort of pointy ends.
one?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's already.
Yeah, it's already in.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing I would bring to your attention is this going down Newcastle, where, the whole thing was to try to include the whole property. They didn't include the whole property for this lot that's purple. They just kept the line straight.
It's still a split lot.
It's still, it's half in, half out, and the house is in the district. But
And the other yellows there, which are an expansion of the district,
yes,
the base lot is already in the district, so it's not adding lots to the district?
Correct.
well, we're the first 150 feet of the lot on the frontage are in the district.
But there are no lots that now will be in that were not at all in before.
Right.
We take the green one
Take the
out.
green out.
We're taking the green one out, right?
What's the argument behind this? I'm looking at that, the big yellow lot and the kind of right there.
Yep.
Like, if your house is not abutting, if the house where you place your structure is not abutting any historic property, what's the impetus besides saying?
That's the next conversation that I also had with Reagan. The way to really do this in detail, especially now that we have street view, you can sit in a meeting like this and go building by building. It shouldn't be parcel based, in my opinion, it should be building based. And when it was first installed, the only way to do it building based would be to walk it with a map. It should be pretty difficult.
I thought that was already done. I thought every historic property was identified?
They've got, I forget all the different criteria, Beth probably knows, it's contributing.
They did a survey.
Yeah, I don't know them off the top of my head.
There's two different surveys that were done. It didn't catch all of the district, but most of the district has surveys that were done.
Okay.
I have a question about the white lots near all the yellow lots that are facing the street.
So those are in, and those
Oh,
are
okay,
just.
they're just not
right.
being affected, that's why they're
right.
not colored, okay.
Exactly.
That's why I was confused.
Traffic is confusing.
I was like, wait, why?
When I
is it
first
white
looked at the
lights?
other one with all the orange, I thought, all those are coming in?
No, those are going out, that part I got.
So what does it mean when they wanna do a ADU on that lot?
They can, if they have a single family home, they can do an ADU, but it will have to
It'll have to,
conform to, yeah, it has to go to
it'll have
HCC.
to go to HCC and architecturally
Yep.
conform to the existing structure.
It'll get reviewed by the HDC
Yeah.
and, you know, they do their thing, so should be a context of the neighborhood.
So can I just follow up on Tony's question? So Regan's answer was that this was to move to the full lot as an easier mechanism? Is that basically how she described it, or you guys?
She said there was a lot of debate at the HDC about this. Some members were very vocal about not wanting anything to come out. But after a lot of debate, they agreed on that, and then they thought it was important. I'll just say what she said. That some of these parcels that are split, that they should all come in because of the way the lots were configured. And I asked if they went lot by lot looking at it, she said they did.
Yep.
So.
Question for staff, because I can't remember, has this already come to first reading, or was it just referred out and then comes back for first reading? Just because there won't be time for us to take this up until January, no matter what.
I think, let me see.
I can't remember. I don't remember what it said.
Referred it to the planning board for recommendation, so I don't think,
Okay, so it's not. So we won't pick this up till January, no matter what.
I've got a question that is kind of a process one, that Eric's letter kind of kicked it off for me, that we had somebody that was gonna be put in or out, and they weren't notified apparently ahead of time. And so we've got, dozens of dozens of property owners who, the value of their property will go up or down, and they may or may not like the restrictions on what they can and can't do with their property. When we have a site plan review, we are required to notify abutters and certainly anybody affected by it. It seems like this time, in this circumstance, we don't do that, which I'm surprised at.
We do when the zoning is changed. So this is the preliminary background to get there.
This is the point at which decisions will really be made. So.
Well, not really, and actually, because of your email, and I'm sorry to let you know this. I had, in February, I talked about a possible zoning amendment process change, and that, I think, would tie into that. Some communities have a different process where the planning board process is more formal. Instead of just going, seems like a good idea, planning board has to go through a checklist of things like, does this conform with the master plan? Will it affect the budget in any way that we know of? Is it in conformance with the studies that Peter's had done, which are always ongoing and changing all the time? And it's a whole checklist of things. I've got it with me if we want to look at it. But in communities that do it that way, the planning board recommendation to the council then becomes much more of a informed document. And some communities, I think Dover's one of them, the council then only has one hearing. But the planning board can have a hearing. The way it is right now, our meeting's just like tonight, it's informational discussion. And I don't want to keep people out, but now, if, let's say we make a recommendation on the historic districts, now the council will have 3 readings on it. So you have a hearing here, and then you have 3 public input sessions of the council. That's a lot of public input.
So, and the HDC has had their go at it also already, so. So the expectation is that the people who are affected by this will be informed as if they were abutters in our normal process, and they'll have an opportunity to go to the city council meeting to make their comments,
Correct.
not us here.
But if we change the process, we could have a hearing here, maybe have it be a 2-hearing process, 1 hearing on council. It's a charter change, it's a big deal, may not be a charter change, it's definitely a big zoning change. And I haven't discussed it with I discussed it with Kate and John at one of our other meetings, and they like the idea. But I haven't discussed it with Doug, and I haven't discussed it with other councilors, so.
It would be good for the property owners to get their oar in the water before the train, to mix metaphors, gets too far down the track. 'Cause by the time it comes out of here as a comprehensive recommendation from us and from the HDC to the city council, they're probably not gonna be picking at one property or another, so earlier in the process would be better for the property owners.
It's point well taken, and your email reminded me of the earlier that I just haven't brought back. And I discussed it with these guys. It was back in February, believe it or not. So we can take up that conversation again if the board would like to.
Do we notice at first reading or second reading?
Second reading is a public hearing.
Right, so they don't notice until the actual second reading at city council.
But if they've heard about it, they could come to the public comment.
Yeah, absolutely, but if I'm just talking about when do the individual notices go out to the public and to the true people that this affects, so.
Well, we have an applicant or a property owner that's a little more dialed in than others, who
Right.
picked up on, hey, wow, you're changing my property.
State law for zoning changes, does it require notification?
Depends on the number of people affected. If it's 100 or fewer, 100 or fewer, you have to notify by certified mail. The city does it anyway, I think, for zoning changes.
Yeah, we typically do.
I think it was missed, wasn't it missed on the property out by the church a few years ago?
I don't think it was missed. I think it's that it was noticed, but I don't think it was noticed. I don't know, how did that one go? Did we not notice every individual property owner?
Which one?
On the
Something was-
Christchurch,
Chase.
the
Oh, no, it's Chase Street.
G2 rezoning, I think it was.
There was a notice problem.
gateway zone?
Yeah.
I thought there was, I think if there's over 100, then you put notice in the paper, but you don't have to notify individual
Right.
property owners. If it's under 100, every
Right.
individual property owner
Yeah.
gets notice. We definitely
But
notice in
not
the paper.
necessarily a butters, just the actual property.
Exactly.
The actual
Right.
property.
And that's what I think sometimes people don't realize, it's the property owners who would get the notice, not the abutters to those properties.
Or tenants?
For zoning
Tenants,
changes.
yep.
So how's the
For a
board
motion or anything here on this?
I was just
or-
gonna say, how does the board feel about the HDC recommendation with that one change?
It's fine by me.
I'm good with it.
Do we make a recommendation to council in that regard?
Do we have to wait till our meeting?
We don't have to, but we should.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is a meeting.
I know I was
So-
late. What was the one change?
That green is not gonna be included.
Good, okay. That was my only question I had, was the green.
That's my
goes
first
away.
question too.
I walk by there almost every day and I read that guy's email and I said I concur with every word of his email. I don't care that at all.
It was,
It was a mistake.
it was basically a mistake.
Just testing the town, see if it knows.
That was the first thing I asked.
Discussion of this in the context of the master plan.
Yes. The consultants have reached out, they want to have regular conversations with me, and I know they're having regular conversations with the gentleman on both sides of me. That'll help me inform the board more of what's actually taking place in formal meetings, but yes. And HTC is very interested too. Oh, component of history in this city is a big issue to me, and I think it is for most people, so I think it needs to be addressed and considered in the master plan, along with everything else.
What is the designation of this historic district based on? So like when I helped get a neighborhood on the historic register, it was based on, it was a trolley car design neighborhood. So this historic district seems like a broad one. What is it in terms of?
They have a designation like a trolley car neighborhood, but the historic district it originally was a historic district A and B, but they've done two different studies of the entire historic district. So there's listed on the Natural Register, most recently when the bridge, Memorial Bridge was redone, a new study was done to look at the historic district area and the houses in it, and they have rating of each one, but I don't know about a specific basis for the historic.
Because that would
district, like a
obviously
streetcar.
make it different on what's a contributing and what's a.
Yeah,
So-
you have to get into the nuts and bolts of the report to get that kind
I
of
think,
detail.
I think the list is in the statute, that
Yeah.
you can, when you can create an HDC, all the requirements are in the statute, I'm pretty sure.
Because we have properties that are on the register but not in our HDC.
Correct, the historic register is a totally different animal, right?
Yeah, it's a historic area, not necessarily a streetcar neighborhood, like I've seen those and similar things in other communities.
Yeah, I mean, because some communities will just use like the 50 years rule. And so, you know, this area of town is over 50 years.
That's California.
Yeah, I mean, I was in college in
Everything
Florida. Florida also kind of used the 50 years rule because that's all, you know, that the part of Florida I was in, that's all they had. But I was just wondering what kind of Portsmouth was using.
I've heard from people who were on the HDC back when it was an A and B, and they said it was so much going on, they couldn't keep up with the meetings, and that's why they cut it back. What it's worth. So the Gateway rezoning, folks get a chance to look at that.
We're not going in order.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Parking was next.
I went to B without looking at A.
Residential uses.
I'm like, wait, are we not going in order? Am I gonna have to go find that?
Good catch. So we've talked about moving parking to site plan before. I think the board was in favor of doing that, and
And I've started working on like, and, you know, importing it into the site plan and then how, you know, but it's kind of a lot of work, so I'm working on that.
you know, we have to do it such that there's not a time period when there's no parking regulation at
Right.
all. So,
So the general purpose of doing that is to give us more discretion?
it's more flexible. The planning board can act, like under subdivision regulations, we can waive things and modify things very easily with a board vote. Same thing with site plan. Can't do it with zoning. Conditional use permits, there's some flexibility, but not as much. Has to be spelled out, specific criteria, and those criteria have to be met. But in a site plan reg or a subdivision reg, it can be based on the specifics of an application that, you know, you can't think of everything when you're writing regulations, and something may come up. And if an applicant has a good argument for something, it allows the board to address it.
It also allows us to look at things differently outside of downtown to downtown. So it gives us market flexibility based off of a per project basis. And that streamlines it because now we're not having all these conditional use permits or variances based off of parking.
Right, because the other thing about a conditional use permit, if an applicant doesn't like the result or an abutter, it has to go to court. Whereas with the site plan site plan interpretation, there's an argument, it can go to ZBA. So it gives more flexibility, keeps things more local.
So we've added a couple hundred parking requirements downtown without adding any physical structure for parking. And this will make it easier for us to exercise judgments to allow parking.
What do you mean we've added a couple hundred? Can you clarify that statement? We've added a couple hundred?
Well, the co-living has 125 units and
How do
No,
you-
that's not 125 units, it's 125 occupants.
documents, okay.
But
You said parking, I think you meant units or people. He said parking, and I was,
So 125 units there, plus others in other places.
I think there's I just would like to pause for a second, because I think there's a part, we're doing a misjustice to this board by stating some of these things. There's a parking demand in those projects right now. There's not a new parking, right, demand. That building has occupants and has people using the facilities. Right? Do you agree? That building's occupied and has people using parking?
Right.
And engineering planning science tells us that residential use is less impactful than commercial use. So I'm being nitpicky here because I think this enters the public realm and people have this conversation. They said the planning board just approved this demand and all of a sudden, what are they doing? And that's why I don't mean to.
No, that came up during the review of that One Congress Street project. That brought that up because it's time of day use as well.
That as well, yes.
So, and the parking garage has more availability overnight.
I know it wasn't your point. I apologize, but I just wanted to
It's worthwhile.
address this.
And that particular project did not ask for or receive a conditional use for parking.
Yeah, because we wrote it
Didn't have
into
to
the
provide
zone.
any.
Within
Right, it's not required.
a certain number of feet of
600.
parking, yeah.
Yeah.
So, sorry, go on with your point.
But do
Bill.
keep in mind, those offices, a lot of those employees all do have day passes to the parking garage. So
Yeah.
that will really make our parking garage more flexible if they're not using all of those passes anymore. And we have other people coming in, so.
Yeah, I don't want to relitigate it. I'm sorry, Bill, go on with you.
No, that's
It
fine.
was so much fun the first time.
But it is important we don't put this information out into the public.
So anyway, it will allow the planning board to address things in a more flexible manner. You can literally do things almost on the fly, depending on how the site plan reg get rewritten. And that's what is being worked on. Some of the stuff from the land use committee wasn't completely accurate. It's not gonna be the panacea, be all end all, but it will
The
make
housing
things.
committee, you mean?
Housing committee, it will make things easier. I can't keep the committees all straight, I'm sorry. All right. Anything else on that?
I've been all for it for a long time.
This comes up at every meeting anyway. And then we have to tell people in the public, we can't actually do anything about that, so I feel like it's not.
Well, right, to the fact that we require parking in places where we shouldn't, and we don't require enough where we probably should have more, and this is gonna give us that flexibility on a per project basis to decide what parking really, now they can tell us, like, we're gonna have this many people. We predict, this is, based off of the engineering and the science behind it, this is how many parking spaces we're gonna need for this project. And they can show it and prove that to us so that we have that information to move forward with.
It works both ways. You already have maximum parking, but that is something to consider in some locations, like look at the Walmart parking lot. Way overbuilt,
Way too much parking.
and that's just something they do. You have the resources. Apple does the same thing.
They need some out parcels or something there. They need some out parcels or something of that property.
Along the street, along the highway.
Yeah.
It's an RV park.
That's what it's turned into, yeah.
If you pave it, they will come.
If you pave it, they will come. So true, so true.
I think now we're on the gateway, right?
Yes, you are in the right order now.
That confused me the way it was. So this is more of a big deal. Folks have a chance to look things over.
The question I had is who will have authority over determination of infrastructure? Complete, having the satisfactory infrastructure for this project.
Well, TAC
TAC.
would be,
TACT.
Yeah. They're the ones that review it before it comes to us, right? So they'll let us know whether or
That's
not.
their decision right there. It ends right
Well,
there.
they just.
The recommendation.
they recommend to us whether or not we have the capacity.
But to pick up on your, and especially now that we have Wednesday's meeting also on the capital improvements plan, which infrastructure is one of the issues. It's not inappropriate to ask for TAC to respond to something like a rezoning request like this, and if this would put excess burden on the infrastructure. I haven't heard anything like that, but, you know.
Yeah, I don't know that we don't have the capacity, but I was wondering.
That's a good
Depends on,
If it
depends on area of the
becomes a-
city. Depends like South Lafayette, you know, Border of Rye, the system's really challenged there with infiltration. And so on the sewer side, so any big development down there you're probably gonna hear DPW say, you know, the development's gonna have to do something to help the system.
Well, the GNOD also, that's got
Yeah.
issues with, the way the piping ran through the wetlands and all that, it's, needs some significant upgrades out there.
Right, there's gonna be some major changes to the,
They're
based
always
off of those
looking to
projects.
upgrade to try to service these areas, but it's a good point. I mean, it's something that's constantly going on at DPW to revise their studies, revise their work, and raise more monies from the developers as they come in. You know, the 3400 Lafayette Road and the Friends Nest project both had to add money to the sewer study to move, to move north, like Tony's saying. The sewer station down there is pretty overwhelmed, so they have to build capacity. That's what they're working on. A lot of that is taking away infiltration of groundwater, but also building new pipes. That'll be what happens out at
GNOD.
GNOD zone, yeah.
Right, the developer's going to pay or do a lot of that work.
And the
Christmas tree shop, they upgraded the water line along Woodbury.
Just recently for
It's
that
happening
project.
right now.
Yeah, it's happening right now.
Does everybody know what infiltration is, what they mean when they say that?
Yes.
Is that water getting into the pipes?
Water's getting into the sewer pipe.
Drainage
It's
water.
Basically cleaning groundwater.
I learned about it the
Adding.
hard way.
I was just saying, adding to the burden of the treatment plant.
Yeah.
Right, you don't want your sewer treatment plant to be overwhelmed every time it rains.
Plus, if it's bringing in silt and rocks and all that, it can,
Clog the pipe.
you're gonna have to go in and jet the pipe to clean all that out, have backups. And
When you have the city talking about these sewer separation projects, that's exactly what they're talking about. Is they're coming in and they're taking the drainage and separating it from the sewer so that we have separate pipes for each one.
Back in the day, it was one pipe.
All one pipe.
Yeah. The river.
And we destroy neighborhoods trying to do this great work.
So the question on these going to Gateway, is that, it started with the Housing Committee having a longer list, and they agreed on a half, more or less, and they've gone forward with the half, and now asking for the second half.
It actually started more like 3 to 4 years ago in Land Use Committee. I was actually the one who originally looked at a huge swath of properties and proposed a large pile of properties, and we, as a group, went through each and every property and made a decision which ones we thought would make a really good move, and those are the ones that have been done. Ones that we thought needed more conversation are the ones that we're now approaching.
So they didn't make the first cut.
Land use actually made the first cut, and that was all done during the land use timeframe. And now housing's like, okay, let's go back to that and let's take a look at those other properties, especially with some of the changes in the state law. It seems to make a lot of sense that we now take a look at these additional properties that they talked about and others if there are some.
Were there any learnings from having approved a subset of the total that should guide our thinking about getting to the balance that didn't
It did
make the cut?
generate some projects.
Mm-hmm.
It did definitely generate some projects. And I know one of the conversations that came up at the Land Use Committee 3 years ago was changing industrial zone property. And, you know, industrial zoning is more of a historic designation. And a lot of true original industry, like the Pike plant, I guess would be the closest thing we have to real industry in the town. There isn't that much of that anymore, though there used to be. A lot of what is, you know, there's a lot of assembly use, that sort of a thing happening in different communities around,
But don't you think it's because a lot of it moved to Pease?
and a lot moved to Pease, yeah.
And we can't do housing at Pease, but they can do that at Pease. So I think a lot of it, there's been a shift as to where our true industrial folks are these days.
Housing piece is another conversation.
Totally separate conversation.
Can we talk about what the different shadings mean in this?
Oh, that's the zoning.
Yep.
I understand, but what, we have,
You're asking
you
which
have the
zoning?
you have the yellow line.
Yep.
Is that the district?
That is actually the corridor from the master plan. So when the current master plan had these gateway corridors.
Yep.
So this is just showing that this property is in that corridor.
Okay, so bottom left from where you're pointing now, it's outside the yellow line, but it's shaded yellow.
This is SRB, single residence B zoning,
Which
Yep.
is yellow in all our zoning.
and then this is wetland and wetland buffer.
Correct.
And then,
And like the orange up above is,
So the yellow line
what
has
are the
nothing to do with
GR
the yellow shading.
districts?
right, and the yellow line comes from the master plan.
Right.
So
And so what is, in this image, what is being added?
this parcel, that's.
That's office research.
So on the maps, the parcels that are labeled with their map number, their current zoning, and
Is this where the hotel is right now?
yes,
Okay, and so that would be office research, and we'll convert that to gateway, which give them an ability to convert to have residential use there.
yes.
A bit more flexibility, but yet it'll still allow the use that's there. And that's kind of the point of gateway, is to allow more flexibility in the uses.
And they don't become non-conforming, right?
Right.
So then if we go to the next map,
Well, it's the hotel and office buildings, right? It's all
There's
one
buildings
lot.
in there, yep.
Yeah.
So this is Morona Road, that orange is Gateway 2, and then across the street, industrial. So this is the intersection of Morona Road and Beverly Hill.
Yep.
There are 3 properties here. They're all zoned industrial. And proposed was to just make them Gateway 2.
So you said that Portsmouth didn't have a lot of like heavy industry. So we're not looking at like if we go from industrial to something else, there's not gonna be a lot of like issues with the land. So like
Dirty
toxins
sites.
or,
Oh.
yeah, anything like that, you're not looking at there being a bunch of chemicals that just used to.
If there are, they have to deal with it, but I don't think there have been historic industrial uses on many of these properties.
I don't know if that would motivate us either way. Because where I take it you're coming from is like, hey, we don't want housing here because it might be dangerous soils. But I think the more appropriate way is if they find, there's steps they have to go through to determine if there's hazardous soils of phase 1, phase 2. Then they clean it up.
Yeah, I just wanna make sure that we would kind of be aware so they can't come back to us and be like, oh, we're so surprised because when we bought this parcel, it was designated as this.
That's
We
sort
didn't
of-
know it was industrial at,
Yeah, that's sort of all of Portsmouth. Like, no one savvy develops in Portsmouth with a saying, oh, this is what the zoning is. There's nothing that was ever there. I mean, everything. It's 400-year-old city, so it's.
And not to mention, these lots are right next to a wetland, so there's a whole lot of stuff that would be done there
Okay.
just through the state, let alone the city.
My
So,
question more on this one is being next to Pike Industries. I mean, I know we've received a lot of feedback regarding that proximity. Are we opening a can of worms here? What do we think?
It is down a rather steep hill there. I mean, it's because I was wondering myself why not this spot across the road, because it's actually the paint shop and the hot tub thing that are next to Pike, and then there's the road, this big drop off, and then those other buildings. So
But you're keeping those 2 in, or those 2 properties in, rather than, so the only ones would be on the other side of Beverly, so.
my thing is they've got kind of a triple buffer there with properties, road, natural feature. Seems
Yeah, I mean, normally you want to have the zoning similar across the street, but this is a good example not to do that for that reason.
So,
isn't there a daycare down there somewhere actually?
There is.
so you're suggesting not?
it's over right
It's
here.
close. Yeah.
It's right
So the
there.
yellow is from the master plan, but
Right.
we're not talking
Just
about
the red-
changing that,
just the
just
red
the
outline.
red.
It's just the parcels that are labeled.
Oh,
Yeah, just the parcels that are labeled.
The graphic is.
about the third time I'll understand.
Your color chart for the maps. Yeah.
So it's basically the parcels that are adjacent to the G2.
Now, these use, I don't, I think some of these are auto repair,
Yeah, Ben's Auto Body is in that corner right
yeah,
there.
and then,
And then there's a plumber, I think, that takes
Yeah.
up one of the buildings, and then there's a glass place. Sorry, I spend a lot of time in this neighborhood.
Glass place, yeah.
I've been to the glass place many times.
Yeah, the rental place is on the,
That's in the.
The
red
rental
area.
place is actually already in the G2.
oh, okay, that's right, yeah, all right.
And what's the first lot of the G2? I think that's where the shanty or something is, and that strip building, and then the. I really do spend a lot of time in this neighborhood. It's sad that
It's a nice spot. It's not like it's stuff in there.
well, my office is on the other side of the wetlands.
the auto repair use is a conditional use permit, but they would be,
They'd be grandfathered in to continue what they are doing.
There's no pressure on the current uses, owners that comes from this?
No,
no,
this comes from a blue ribbon committee.
Yeah, I'm just thinking for the people that own the property now, if we change their zoning, it doesn't cause them to have to change their use. They're grandfathered to do what they do.
right.
Correct.
So I'm not against these, but I think it's warrant of discussion. There's been typically in the city, and correct me if I'm wrong, Peters, when you have a site that's fully developed like those, paved right up to the property line, buffer, oftentimes I've seen that the new development comes in and they're granted an exception to build within the buffer because they might be improving a current situation. That's pretty
Yeah.
common, right?
It's usually what the commission or the planning board ultimately asks for, is that they do some improvement to the buffer. If it's all paved right up to the edge of the wetland, then that improvement becomes almost easier in some ways, because it's removing pavement. But yeah, they're not asked to start from scratch, like this is an untouched site. Like even though the ordinance says you're completely in the buffer and you have to count all that as impact, the goal is to try to reduce the impact to make it a workable project, but then with less impact on the buffer, maybe enhance the buffer at the edge of the wetland more so. That's typically how it works.
Is there any, is there like a do no harm, do no worse thing? I mean, is it they have to improve it, or can they just say, hey, we're gonna keep the same?
What you're getting at is another
I
proposed
was
zoning
gonna say,
change.
Rick's gonna jump in any second.
My point being is that, like, say, I'm just gonna draw a line in the sand.
Yeah.
Right now, they're 100 feet past the buffer, which is the book, right?
Yes.
And is the current use of restaurant and retail with 100 feet past the buffer better than 4-story residential 50 feet past the buffer? Like, how does one
I
parse
think
that?
the use isn't looked at as closely by the Conservation Commission. It's really about the impervious surface impacts and the amount of open space they're able to keep on the property. So areas they can take out of pavement, areas they can plant vegetation, those are much more important to them than the size of the building or the use in the building.
Okay.
But I can see them, giving pause to an industrial use in the buffer that wasn't there before, but I don't know that that's in the regulations anywhere unless there's some sort of transfer of materials that happens as part of their process.
Two things. One is if it's redeveloped, they've got to go through the whole process. They're going to look at their drainage and they're probably improving all of that, which is probably ancient and just dumping stuff into the wetlands and not getting treated at all.
Yeah.
So that's going to be an improvement. All of that's going to happen. But to Peter's point, what we're doing in trying to say, do no harm, make it better, our regulations don't actually say that. That's something I had at the end of the agenda to talk about if we have time.
I don't know that it is germane to our discussion here, but it's interesting from a developer's point of view. A property like this, there's three values. There's three potential projects, right? There's a project that is fully outside the buffer. That's going to be the value they're going to try to tell the current owner I don't want to buy it at because I'm going to be restricted to this. The owner's going to say, hey, look, I've got 5 acres of land. I'm paved right up. You can use this entire land. And there's somewhere in between. And so, again, that's just the reality of how this stuff gets developed. It's like people are going to, some developer is going to look at this parcel and say, all right, how much can I get beyond the green line? If it's green, everybody else agrees it's a green line.
That shows you the buffer, yes.
So I think it's important people to, I think it might enter into your realm of thinking of how you think about this stuff.
Now, embedded in this proposed change was changes from minimum lot area per dwelling unit. I wonder where those values came from. Did your committee work come up with those?
I mean, what we're supposed to talk about later?
I thought it was part of this.
No,
No, I'm jumping ahead again.
You jump, I'm like, I'm not, I can't remember until I look at it.
no, we, yeah, there's
I think
two-
it was
there's
a-
two more maps.
Yeah, let me get through the maps first.
But those changes will affect these changes, because they go together.
But they weren't, no, those aren't gateway.
Okay.
Yeah, they're more about,
General, all right.
general, yeah.
That's Lafayette, and what's that?
There's Lafayette and Hoover, and there's currently an 8-unit, so these lots have been merged.
Oh, this is the old vet clinic.
Yeah.
Yes, my old vet clinic. Yep.
And there's an 8-unit building going up,
Yeah, it's already been approved and being built, so.
and it's currently zoned MRB. And one of the discussions at the land use committee, even way back then, was these older zoning districts that we have, like maybe 10 acres in total of, MRB, MRO, business.
Wouldn't our zoning be
Office
easier if we just
research.
didn't have any of those?
Yeah,
That's-
we have.
That'd be streamlined in itself. We shouldn't have office research in my mind anywhere because it doesn't make any sense in today's modern.
We don't need to complicate our zoning ordinance any more than it.
Right, so deleting some of these would be really handy. That's why I've always been pushing for us to do that.
Office research?
Yes, it's an office research district, and we've gotten rid of a lot of it, but not all of it. And all it allows is basically like medical research and offices.
Sort of like peas.
Yeah, which we don't need because we have these.
Like, but seems very like particular and maybe a little, almost too particular.
Somerville, Massachusetts has made a lot of money with that in recent years. They've become, I guess, like what used to happen on Route 128 around Boston. They've become an office research center. And because they've sucked it all in, there's not much of a demand for it.
It's not so much about what's going on in the site, it's what your butters want to be next to.
Yeah, yeah, it just seems like a very specific zone that you could put
Started happening
under
when I was
broader.
driving here.
I did not bike today.
Not to diminish the importance of housing in any way, but part of what makes the city great is the ability to have access to these types of properties, to start a business, operate a business, and as a resident, to have access to a painter, an auto body, a plumbing supply. So as we're replacing these with housing, you know, what's a long-term vision for
Well, I would,
those things? Or are people now having to cross the bridge to?
I mean, I would say we're replacing with a mixed-use district, so a lot of those uses are still permitted.
Still permitted, but now competing with,
Yeah, but with the value of the land, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm just randomly picking numbers at the, commercial is $6 a square foot and residential is $20 a square foot to sell it. They're gonna be, develop it, that's what they're gonna
Yeah.
do. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and sort of trying to predict the future here.
well, yeah, predict. I think you just did, $6 and $20, there's,
Those are random numbers, but yeah.
but there is a spread.
Yeah.
And zoning aside, or permitted uses aside, residential is gonna win the day.
That's a good point, and I think we're seeing with what's happening, it's just a nibble on the edges of the GNOT. There's a huge demand for housing out there, and it's valuable. They're gonna make money with it. And I tried, when I had the site walk, I was asking the woman in charge of things with Kane what their long-term plan was, and she wouldn't reveal it. But they're looking at all that existing commercial property, redeveloping it, and I think it's gonna be a lot of residential. So, that's also something that could have affected the downtown, because in the current hot residential market, the legislature was considering something at one point that would have required allowing residential on the first floor in commercial districts. They changed it.
passed?
No, it didn't,
That got struck.
it got struck.
Okay.
And that could be a real problem in downtown Portsmouth because, the condominium market is very hot, or was, I assume it still is, I don't know, you'd know, but
The market's just,
Other
it's
towns,
cool
It
like
varies.
this much.
You know, the market goes up and down, but when the residential market's way up high, if the first floor downtown converted to residential, that would be terrible for downtown Portsmouth.
We
other
wouldn't have the walkable
downtowns
city.
have done that.
Some downtowns have done that.
Permitted.
So
Then you don't have the walkable,
It's a
enjoyable
downtown,
city.
yeah.
We could go down for a while and then this tangent, but, you know, taking back what I said a little bit, I think there's like an ebb and flow, and that if there's a lot of housing gets developed, then there's gonna be a need for your coffee shop, for your car dealership, for your auto body shop, and so being a mixed use, you know, someone would fill that need.
I'd also like to,
Auto
let's,
body and residential.
are you guys familiar-
occupying the same
are you
property.
are you familiar with the Portsmouth Green, which used to be the Southgate
Yes.
Plaza? That is an ideal example of what the Gateway was trying to create. Businesses and residents all living harmoniously on the same lot, and that's what's going on down there with their apartment building and now the new condo building.
Tends to, there's a product associated with that. Wherever you go, you're gonna see
Right.
the same businesses.
Well, we're not trying to get rid of the
You're gonna see
businesses, we're
you're not gonna
trying to
see
mix
the plumbing
it.
supply store next to Sage, you know.
But
You're
I'm
not gonna
saying,
see an opportunity for somebody to go, hey, I'm gonna start a business and operate it on this property. It's controlled by a developer and it's like we have.
that particular one, but it's the
Yeah.
idea of
It's
what's
restaurants and
the,
these stores and these
the
workout.
zoning behind it is the same, and it could be adjacent lots, it doesn't have to all be one lot. The idea is we don't wanna get rid of all the businesses, we wanna mix residential in with the existing businesses.
The more mixed-use districts do create more opportunity. You know. So, it is something to keep an eye out, but. Bill?
More property tax? What are the property tax implications of this proposal that we're looking at? If you have more housing in these areas,
So right now, the commercial properties are assessing very low, especially office buildings. What's on the commercial side assessing high value are apartment buildings. Those are the high value, better for the tax base. So if you can take a strip mall that's probably not very well taxed and build it up 3 stories and put housing above it, you're gonna get a much more robust tax, commercial tax into that. So it definitely helps the tax base to do this.
By increasing valuation.
Correct. Because some of the valuations, especially for, my office is an office park. I have a 720 square foot condo. I pay $1,000 a year in taxes because of how low the value is. I think it's valued at like $90,000. So that's where offices are right now, is they're very low valued, which is one of the reasons why we all talked about the co-living and the conversion, because that's gonna be a much higher valued commercial use that will help expand the tax base, which is one of the things the city desperately needs us to do.
And has that pattern, apartment buildings being more valuable, held true for a long time?
Well, it's the most recent assessment that came out in 2024. That's where I'm getting this information from, because the most recent assessment just done is the highest valued commercial projects, aside of, you know, like Alonza Biologics, right? You know, you're talking about a super large business. You can't really compare that. But when you're comparing, you know, a strip mall or an office building, you really can see the difference. All right, I got off track, but I think it helps the conversation.
So 4 properties, sorry. One is right behind Walmart.
Yep.
It's currently zoned industrial, and then there are 3 just off of Lafayette on Heritage Avenue,
The storage units.
storage units, which are not permitted. And then, what was that one?
That one lot behind the strip
Across from the
plazas.
Ace, what's there? Oh.
What
It
was
just
the
says
question?
warehouse building, 55
Yeah.
Heritage.
Is it the one you go and you buy all those little cute
It's
things?
the
in?
fastener.
The fasteners. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. The fastener place.
House and all?
My husband took me there once. I was very
So all
overwhelmed.
No,
the guy that used to be somewhere else in the city and moved over there,
shackles, blocks,
he's great.
can't find it.
What's that treed area right behind the storage buildings? Down, right
This?
there, yeah.
Johnson's. That's
I think that's part of this lot.
Is it wet?
No, here's buffer.
It's like low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
I believe that's where the old Fisher,
Thermo Fisher.
The
thank you,
Aprilia,
Thermo Fisher
yeah.
was. I was like, the something Fisher.
It's a Aprilia now, it's
Yeah,
the
it's part of
same.
the same
My
one.
wife
Yeah.
stores
Part of this lot.
So did my neighbor.
I mean, they could use housing there. Nobody in that factory lives in Portsmouth.
Right, so if we allowed them, maybe they'd
Yeah.
build a housing building right where
Shouldn't say
that
nobody,
is.
No one I know there
Nice
works.
open space.
Right. It's a big enough lot. It might be worth considering adding that lot to this conversation.
So these are the ones that,
Yep. But click on the other one we're talking about.
yeah, this one,
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
8 acres.
Right, but there is enough room outside that parking lot that they could build housing for their workforce.
Looks like low hanging
If we
fruit.
allowed them to do so.
Low hanging fruit to me.
Can we add that one to the conversation, Peter?
Sure.
Either Peter.
That's industrial now.
So if you took these criteria and you went west on Heritage,
Mm-hmm.
would you not find more properties that would fit this thought process?
What is in front of the, yeah, right, sort of just down Heritage behind the, storage units? That, those, that one and that one, those two. I think you have to go up to the picture for us
Please,
to
ma'am.
actually see. Whatever. Can't tell. Oh, FW Web, there's your plumbing supplier.
This is,
I think those are offices, aren't they?
It's Aprilia.
Yeah.
Prettier? What is Prettier?
Aprilia is what Thermo Fisher
this is
sold.
switching to what-
They
Okay,
sold their
yes.
glass business to Aprilia.
And I've heard they
Yeah, they're-
installed a huge bank of,
It's like an office building and then like a glass cutting facility, which is
And the building to the northwest of that is Key Collision.
oh, here?
Yeah.
So-
The lower one.
First one. he was
Right,
very
right,
excited.
yeah, that's key.
The one north of it, that's all Thermo Fisher. That's
Amazon's doing it.
yeah, extrusion alternative. Sorry.
Nice, if other people could use the chargers.
So, yeah, to answer Bill's question, yes, you could probably. I think the land use committee was looking at the next lot in, you know, the adjacent lot in from,
The whole theory behind the first cutoff was we were trying to, when we first did Gateway, we did it one lot down the road.
Yeah.
And so the second swath at it, we wanted to go one more lot in to expand it. But we didn't talk about going down the side roads very much, but that can be part of this conversation for sure.
So there's also a question of what belongs here and what belongs in the master plan. So in the master plan, can we recommend that these criteria be extrapolated out into further areas in that southwest quadrant?
Yeah, that's something that they're looking at already, but yeah.
Master plan won't get as specific as saying this should be rezoned, but
Is there a need for industrial?
expansion of the gateway should be considered, and this would be a good area to consider it.
And I think they can consider whether or not industrial districts are useful, or does some of our gateway districts already include the uses that are being done and used in the. So I think that can be a question for them to look at.
Yeah, I don't want to see us at this point jump into those areas yet, because I'd like to, picture each one of these individual parcels turn into a apartment complex, which answers the housing need, but it might not be community-wise the thing we want to build. Like, so we might want to implement some standards if this were to open this area up.
I guess I'm trying to figure out what standards are you talking about? Like what, give me an idea.
Well, they're all connected, right? And so like,
Yep.
let's call it like 8 parcels that are probably 6 acres each. I don't know, I'm just throwing out what looks,
You're talking about going beyond what we've already proposed.
I'm saying let's not go beyond what's being presented here, because I think there's probably, my gut instinct, without putting a lot of planning thought into it, is that I don't wanna see the green, plopped over and over and over again. I feel like we're not building community at that point. There should be some connectivity for the thing. So maybe this could have an incentive. It's like, you can do this, but we want to see where the border of the properties meet, maybe some community space. And so just thinking about it in planning science rather than just having all right, this 6 acre lot turns into a complex, and sometimes they call it the Texas donut, where you have a parking garage and you surround it with with housing. I wouldn't want to see that 6 times out here. It would answer the question of housing, but is it really, building community that I'm assuming the master plan's going to be thinking of? I'm riffing here. I don't know.
And does more housing answer the question of housing? Like just more.
And it does by numerator and denominator, yes, but
But
Well, as a corollary
there has
to
to be
that,
more of a vision of what housing and community looks like in Portsmouth than just more.
well, a
We're getting
corollary
rid
to this
of
discussion though is,
useful-
should Gateway change itself? The Gateway zone, which we're talking about changing the zone into Gateway, within the Gateway criteria, there could be changes there as well. So to
Right.
make things more flexible or not, as we may want to push forward. I suggested that other one just because I look at the storage buildings and I'm thinking that's probably generating a lot of cash flow, and I have a hard time seeing anything happen there in our lifetime, but that tree area not being used was not wetland, maybe something could happen there.
How long has the red been a gateway zone?
2017. This was 2017.
Was it?
There was a gateway.
2017 was our original, and then 2023 was the expansion?
Yeah.
So 2017 or 2023, depending on which area you're looking at. We expanded it
So in the
6 years later.
6 or 7 years, it hasn't all turned to housing.
No, it has
had
not.
other uses.
There's a lot of owners that
Yeah.
could care less
I
and
mean-
won't change what's there.
Not everyone wants to live near the Walmart parking lot. So I think some of
Or
the
storage units.
market will dictate,
Whether or not something actually
yeah. I
happens.
mean, I know there are some that are going up like near the Market Basket that I'm like, they're looking at the Market Basket parking lot, like that's your view. So I do know that,
Are you talking about over on Woodbury or Lafayette?
Lafayette.
Oh, the Five Guys, the place.
Yeah,
Those are all rentals.
So it is happening, but I don't see them being able to get like super expensive condos where your view is the Walmart parking lot.
I will say,
I think there is some market that does help.
use the last 3 years as a litmus test of whether there's a pressure to develop this. The interest rates have made it very difficult to develop.
Yeah.
And so there's lots in this city that I know people are looking at to develop, and they just can't get the numbers to work.
Yeah.
And so the second one of those things changes, things will go.
But they said 2017, so I mean, I'm thinking of at this point, 8 years of time.
There was COVID in there too, so.
Well, yeah, so I guess maybe the last even 8 years is a tough.
And it always takes people a while when you first create a new zoning like Gateway for people to truly understand it and
Yeah.
want to take advantage. The Portsmouth Green was the first place. In fact, their first building was done before we changed that to Gateway. And then we changed it to Gateway, and then they built the second one. So they were probably one of the first in that area, at least, to take advantage of the Gateway zoning, if I remember correctly.
In order to be productive tonight, do we want to add that one more district, or do we want to stay where we're at?
District or plot? District or plot?
Should we add the blue or leave it the way
Sorry,
it
the
was?
plot.
Should we add the blue or leave it the way it was?
I think add the blue because that is the one lot that actually has room on it, and not add any of the others, just that one.
I'd like to leave it until the staff had time to look at that area.
My personal thought is it's very flexible, so I would add it because you're not forcing anyone to do anything they don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems, no one's getting evicted from a predia there by changing that to gateway.
Is this getting decided or are we just putting
No, I'm just saying, I'm hearing enough, maybe we put it on for a vote when we have the,
Yeah.
we'll vote it,
When we have a meeting.
we have the meeting.
I'd go for adding it.
Okay.
Moving on.
Okay, that was it for that.
Yep. Now we can talk about the conversions.
No, I wanna talk about something later.
You always do.
Just kidding.
So this section of the ordinance would potentially open up a lot of opportunity for infill or use of existing
Big buildings.
houses.
Right. But let's start the conversation where we did at the housing committee, which was many, many meetings ago. And it was around the fact that we have we have like over 60% non-conforming based off of lot area.
Yeah.
So if we actually drop these down, it's actually gonna make a lot of the zones, it's gonna make them way more conforming than they are right now. And that was where this conversation started. And then it bloomed into talking about the conversions as well. But I just wanted you to understand that we really did think about it, but we actually had lists in front of us, and I don't have them right here in front of me now, but we were looking at 50 to 60% in those districts don't meet the minimum.
These changes, how did that change? Would the, like, mostly
It's lot area per dwelling.
Yeah, no,
It's lot area per dwelling.
Oh, no, but with the change, how many of those non-conforming would become conforming?
I didn't look at that, because this is.
Shame on you.
Well, I can.
But he can bring that to the meeting when we talk about it.
Yeah. This was just, if you have a big house that has like 6 bedrooms in it, and you wanna, make it into a multifamily, then you could reduce your lot area per dwelling requirement.
And that helps with that.
So it wouldn't be across the board in the district reducing the lot area per dwelling requirement. It's just only if you're gonna convert, but right now it says a pre-1980 structure.
Right.
And then you could reduce your lot area per dwelling requirement.
And
But
what
not for new
changes to-
construction.
Not for new construction, and you can't increase the footprint, you can't increase the height.
Has to be existing of the date of the
You
ordinance.
can only, and you have to meet parking, you have to meet open space and building coverage. And the only thing you can do is add anything for egress. So if you had to add a staircase or something, that's required by the building department.
In SRA and SRB as well?
Well, so currently, it's allowed in GRA, GRB, GRC, what's in black. And so,
Red.
Can you show them what's in there now, Peter, the text up above it? That's what happens in that conversion. So currently, in those pre-1980 buildings, you can do it if you comply with those requirements. But it's very limited in where you can do that. So this expands that ability. 6 zones we're talking about?
So this is like one of those many ways where we can create more housing without actually creating more building.
I don't live in
without
SRA.
changing the
I don't live in
character.
SRA or SRB, but I wouldn't want that.
Where's GRABC?
You wouldn't want that to change?
I wouldn't want that to change in those zones.
What's the reason
You have to
behind
have
that?
you have to have some differentiation in zoning, right? That seems to make everything kind of the same in the city. Like you can have a multifamily right in the street with single family.
But it keeps it looking the same. I guess that's
So-
the point of
Looking
this.
the
It's
same,
it's
but-
one step in that direction, but not a full, completely dive in. But that's a fair point. Changes the density in that neighborhood.
So,
I think you have to maintain some of that.
so the neighborhood across the street, like Lincoln, Miller Ave, that's all GRA in this kind of light yellow. Stark yellow is SRB. This is GRC. GRB is over here. And then we have SRA is this lighter green, I guess. Is that
It's more of a
That makes
beige.
And then, oh wait,
You call that beige.
It doesn't match the
So if
color.
it's theoretical for the south end,
That's
because of
SRA.
parking.
right. I mean, you could, if you didn't have, if you didn't meet building coverage or open space.
So this is qualitatively different than whatever else we've done.
It's a big change.
There's a creative tension in the city between needing housing, which everybody agrees to, and retaining the character of the city, which everybody agrees to. And so how you reconcile those two requires, quite a bit of thought and wisdom. And the gateway says it's okay to do it, but not where people live in the average middle-class Portsmouth community. And we've increased the population 10% in the short time I've been on the board with the stuff we've approved. Mostly in tall apartment buildings in places like the HEB site. This says, no, we're going to go where the people of Portsmouth live, and we're going to put in a building next to you that was once a single family, and you're now going to have 3 families there. Won't change the physical appearance, won't change the parking, because it'll have to be on site, but it fundamentally changes the character of the single-family housing neighborhoods to have what used to be single families now be multifamilies. I don't disagree with that. I think it's a hugely transformational step that needs to be taken with caution.
The 3 areas, the 4 areas primarily, there's a lot of land area. Do we have any idea how many buildings this might involve?
Well, first you got to see if they're conforming. And then if they meet, the dimensional requirements for open space and building coverage, if they can accommodate parking. Well, I can provide, what I provide to the housing committee about the district nonconformities, and then look at how many buildings are in each district. That's easy enough to get.
I'm in agreement with Bill. I was thinking of saying, can we make it a conditional use thing, but man, are we gonna just have inundated with applications? I don't know. Cause I'm sure there's structures where it's like, it wouldn't be a big impact, but there's definitely gonna be houses where there is gonna be an impact. Especially areas where people have limited parking and.
But I think what they're saying is you can't do it if you can't provide the parking. You can't change the footprint of the building with the exception of if you need to add a fire staircase or something. So the appearance of the building is remaining the same, the footprint's remaining the same, parking still needs to be provided. If you have, whatever the parking is for 3 apartments, you need to make sure you can provide all that. So I think there are a lot of buildings that actually couldn't do this because, they can't do the parking, they need to make too many changes. So I don't think as many people are gonna do it as we think. And also, having grown up in old houses that were apartments converted, because that's how my mom could afford to live in a middle-class neighborhood to get me into good schools, I see the value in this. Young families, Portsmouth is losing young families, young people, because we can't afford to live in a big old house. We can't afford to purchase them. I mean, I'm sure, I think Beth, you said they're over $1 million at this point, the average housing price.
Median in Portsmouth is between 800,000 and 900,000, if I remember correctly.
What 25-year-old, 26-year-old out of college, your teachers, I see this as a way to get some of those people who we keep talking about us losing, primarily young professionals, into neighborhoods where they're gonna wanna raise a family, where they're gonna want to be part of the community.
I struggle with it because I hear your point, and I think I said at the last meeting, there's no way to solve this housing problem without a little bit of pain. But the scenario that I've seen play out is in my neighborhood, 3 families living in one house, and they're all related, and and then they bring in someone else to, rent the back. They do an ADU, and there's always been enough space in the parking lot for all those 3 families. But now now they're strangers, and they're like, well, I don't want to be blocked in, even though I have a parking space. And so they start parking in the street. They park, and so you get the neighborhood who feels like they own the public street spot in front of their house, which they don't, and it just changes the dynamic. And so that's where I think the reality of it is that we have to decide where we want the pain. Be okay with stuff like that happening. I don't have the answer for it. I just know that.
And the answer to some of these can be that this should be a conversation during the master plan versus moving it forward. So
I like that.
that
The other thing to think about is, it is a change of character, and if you think about, like at the end of Richards Avenue, where Ruth Griffin's property is, I'm sure she's passed away, I'm not sure, I heard there might be developed, but you take a property like that with a large old home, with a lot of land around it, and if they wanted to just do an inside conversion to multiple units, but conform with parking, which again, remember, we're moving that site plan, so that would be a different conversation for us. But if we had parking requirements, what's now sort of a neighborhood open space becomes a parking lot for those additional units. And on a smaller scale, not a lot as big as Ruth Griffin's, and I've had abutters complain about clients converting things. Even one guy wanted to put in a greenhouse, and the neighborhood complained because they called it a plant factory. on their open
plant
space.
factory, really?
Should have done
Big
it in the
oxygen.
Gateway District, guys.
God forbid those plants are stealing all our oxygen.
Yeah.
It's classic.
Noise from the plant factory.
Noise from the plant factory
Those plants
as they
scream
grow.
at- So,
Plants.
Is it like the smelly flower that they're growing or something?
it was the fan on the end of the
Oh, okay.
during hot weather, but they don't make a lot of noise. So it is. I like the idea of maybe getting a little more study on this one, because I'd like to see it sketched out. Really looking at some, which is more than we're going to get, I think.
No, this one,
This is a big
Yeah.
one.
and
Yeah.
Some of the corridors, but as you get into like the side streets and so forth, like not as much. And everything Brian said is indisputable.
Right.
But there has to be some preservation of the character of these neighborhoods. And a blanket rezoning to just say, you can now make this into multifamily. If one goes, the one next door is gonna go, the one next door is gonna go, the one across the street's gonna go, and it's just gonna start to change. And before we went down that path, I think a lot of discussion and a lot of planning would have to happen. And it would have to be agreed upon by, like everybody, the residents of the city.
Well, I am curious on that front. I don't live in any. I live in I think a single residence neighborhood, but it's not like there are a lot of vacant houses in Portsmouth, and people pay good money for most of those and want to stay. So I'm curious. I don't think there's any way to answer this question, but when you point out that like one's going to change to the next one, I'm curious how many people are actually going to want to change their own houses. I think it would be relatively minimal, but that's just a guess.
The thing I would like to see is the houses that are unoccupied by a out-of-state owner. It's the 5th or 6th house that they have. And we have plenty of those all over.
They're not gonna convert to multifamily.
Yeah, they're not gonna convert to multifamily. They're just gonna sit empty, right? So,
That's any way to address that. But
this won't help, but I would like to see something done.
But
Somebody living in these.
there are investment firms that own a lot of housing in the United States,
yes,
just for income purposes, and I could see that just being an attractive way to make more money. So we have to keep that in mind,
The actual numbers here are very small, though.
because the opportunity's small.
And I would assume those high property, like, I think a lot of those companies will go into places where property values are a little lower so they can buy up a lot. I would assume the high property values might.
There's that, but it's also opportunity. There's not a lot you can do. If you look at our existing zoning, there's not a lot you can do.
Yeah.
But and that's why we need to understand, and I'm not saying I'm against it, I just want to understand it better.
So to me, there's low hanging fruit in this chart, and that's the MRO 7,500 square feet. that just seems so big to me per unit. Where does that come from?
I don't know, cause if you've ever known my house, I'm in the GRC and we're conforming at 3,500 square feet. And that's a big lot.
How big is your lot?
It's conforming to the GRC, so it's approximately 3,500 square feet.
You got
The
a nice
mix-
backyard.
I have a giant backyard and a 2-car garage.
I mean, the MRO, the O, I get the 7,500, I get that where it comes from, but the R, like really, you're limiting, 7,500 square feet. It's a lot of space for a living unit. Anyways,
So maybe there's parts of this that make more sense than others.
Maybe we'll move this one to more data onto the master plan.
I do have, this doesn't really affect anything, but just for clarification, I'm looking at, on page 59 of the packet, it says like, what does multifamily mean? And then it gives like 2 definitions. Is that relevant to is that in reference to a different statute? Or is that in reference to what this would be affecting?
Did you say 59?
Yes. Of the overall meeting packet.
Going way ahead.
This is part of
I
that
stumbled
memo.
across it when I
That's
was.
the, yes,
That's the ADU.
Yeah, I think
That's
that's
radio.
fine.
Oh, no, this is the,
State
allowing multifamily and commercial zone land.
Right.
Yeah, so would that be affecting this potential change? I didn't read into the statutes themselves, I just saw
Right,
that.
in this specific thing, he's talking about how it's defined differently.
Right.
For
In site plan.
multifamily homes, yeah, versus so workforce development housing has its own definition of multifamily is what they're saying. But the RSAs do define multifamily as well, and they're just slightly different. And the point is, we as a city define multifamily as 3 and above.
Okay.
Like the statute. They're saying if you're doing multifamily, you need 5 and above in order to really incorporate. And I think that's the idea of, if you've got 3, you can't probably want more than 2 that would be workforce housing. So I think that's where they're getting the numbers and why the statute's written that way.
We don't actually conform with the statute. But
The workforce housing statute.
multifamily for site plan.
But we can change that.
Yeah. And that may be part of the change we propose with the parking change.
All right, so I think we've talked about this.
So we're good with,
Gotta move it to
So,
the master
any-
plan.
You okay, move it to the master plan?
Are we into
Mechanical,
mechanical units?
we don't want, Rick to get off target, so gotta tell him what's coming next.
are we on 3A? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So this was several months past, where we changed fences to 8 feet, and then we deleted the section on HVAC units, because we were seeing variance after variance request. And looking in other places in the ordinance where it was mentioned but not,
We didn't actually delete
we
it.
didn't delete, so this proposal was to delete the definition, delete that reference in the definition of building coverage, and then in consultation with the fire department and the inspections department, they're fine with, your HVAC units having no setback, but specifically for power generators, they require a 5-foot offset from openings, and they feel that having a 5-foot setback from lot lines would be consistent with their regulations, so that,
And that has to do with the fumes that come out of them, right?
Been good solar power generators?
Oh, Lord. Make us
Do
more
those
complicated.
exist?
It's a thing.
It is a thing?
we skipped
Is that real?
the,
Is he lying
Some
to
of the
me?
problem is that some places define solar panels as generators because they generate power. So
what's
there's
the
not a
rationale
definition.
behind going from 6-foot fences to 8-foot fences?
It's already done.
it's already done.
I'm not gonna argue it. Please don't make me.
That's already been
It's
adopted.
only inside and rear yards, and it's already been changed. I'm not relitigating it, I've already
I'm not
tried.
asking you to, I'm asking the staff.
So 8 feet was adopted, right?
If you-
Yes,
Okay.
it used to be 8 feet, we reduced it to 6, we went back to 8. That's all I'll say.
It was a big argument.
I think it's terrible, 8 feet. It's horrible.
My backyard's on 1 and I really like 8. I would like a fence, so I do appreciate it.
It's the same time we changed and we allow sheds 120 square feet right on lot
It
lines
depends
and
on which
anywhere they want.
side of the sun you're on. If you're on the shade side of the sun, it sucks. And your neighbor puts up an 8-foot fence and, yeah, I think it's a terrible part of the ordinance, but anyways,
Most people can't afford 8 feet.
yeah, that's a problem in this town.
Want fencing?
You can't afford 8-foot fences in this town, for sure. There's plenty of foot. Yeah, I don't know, it's terrible.
8-foot fence on top of a 2-foot wall.
So the proposal is just,
Right, in this block, to strike that and then to just,
Yeah. Add the other,
purpose of the ordinance, mechanical systems are not considered structures, but any power generator must be set back 5 feet from any lot line. To be consistent with fire code.
so, but you have in here HVAC, power generator, et cetera, shall not be considered. So you're saying all
So
of
it's not
them?
gonna be considered a structure, so we don't count it against building coverage, but it's gotta be set back.
So you're considering all mechanicals have to have setbacks?
So just power generators.
Then I think this reads a little confusing.
So these things shall not be considered structures, but any power generator.
I think we have to find a way to say it's just
way to do
power
it, way to do it
generators.
is to add a definition of mechanical systems.
Yeah, I just feel like the way it reads, and I get what you're saying, but the way it reads, it doesn't, I don't think it's clear enough for the average Joe.
Power generator, do you just mean like generator, or like, are we talking about solar panels, or like?
I think we're talking about gas-powered,
Talking like
gas-powered
gas-powered,
Generators.
generators
Power
that you use
outage.
when your power goes out.
okay,
And they're really loud, and they make a lot of fumes.
yes.
Because what if they're portable power generators? Does that have to meet setbacks?
If there
If
were.
you can wheel it in and out? I just think we need to think about how we talk about that.
Maybe I'll talk with fire inspections,
That would
see
be
if
great.
they have a definition
That would be awesome.
generator.
And the
we can maybe have two.
exempted mechanical systems, would just do a definition of that. So it's, you put et cetera in an ordinance, that's kind of like a lawyer's full employment.
I think, what else could I fit into that? What else is et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Right.
It's not hard.
Then we get to talk about solar
Solar.
again.
We didn't have to talk about solar until Logan got on here. I thought we were done with that.
And then we got very busy, and here we are.
It's because we've been holding it all back waiting for your arrival.
I did mark up some comments on
Yeah.
this. I don't know if anyone got a chance to look at those. Just as a note, and I would say my overall opinion is that generally these are all very good as written. Just there's a few things that in my experience I've seen a lot of zoning in a lot of different towns across the country, and sometimes I can see what they're trying to do, and they've written in a way that just makes it very confusing. So most of these are quite good. My comments mostly revolved around like where we came up with some of the percentages or sizes, which in some cases end up, in my opinion, kind of like accidentally punishing you for having like a small house rather than a large house. Which applies mostly to the roof mounted thing, really. Like if it has to be mounted on a roof, the definition being less than or equal to 100% of the roof is kind of redundant because you can't,
It can't
go
be
over
bigger
the
than
edges
the
of the roof
Right.
by electrical code and fire code and a variety of other things. Not that we can't say that, it's just unnecessary, and then you have to put a lot more stuff in your plan.
So you can't put a solar panel that overhangs a roof?
No.
Don't you have to
there's required setbacks for firefighting, in the electrical code and the fire code, both at roof peaks, at roof edges, depends on if it's a flat roof or a pitched roof, but in all cases, there are setbacks.
I thought that the reason that we put the 100% in wasn't to so much limit it to the edge of the roof, was to distinguish between a roof-mounted system and a standalone. When you're getting into providing solar power beyond just the capacity for the property, I think that maybe was what it was about.
Possibly. I mean, the only thing I see here really is that we're saying that it has to be less than or equal to 100% of the roof area of the principal structure. My concern being, for example, if I had a detached garage and wanted, so now principal structure is smaller, I'm limited. And if I had an attached garage, I would be able to put more solar just by way of having a breezeway. It's sort of weird and unnecessary to limit it that way. The available roof structure is already going to limit the size, so.
So
if
it
we just
shouldn't
wanted
say
to-
principal then.
Yeah, it could just say existing roof area or something like that.
Area of the structure.
of the structures on the lot.
These all assume that modern solar panels. What about like the Tesla panel? Like,
The thin film, like roof building integrated.
yeah,
So sorry, I should probably not use terms, but building integrated generally refers to like shingles that are
yeah.
part of the structure. Honestly, they're very uncommon because they're expensive and hard to use. But again, I wouldn't want to limit that. And if we just said has to fit the structure, then it doesn't really.
How many roofs are covered even close to 100%? I mean,
For residential,
if
it'd be insane.
if it doesn't
It'd be
face
crazy.
south, it's not, you're not gonna put panels on it, right?
You could. It depends on what you want to do, but
You could have a monoslope roof.
it's really more. Yeah. So you're thinking pitched roof specifically, but if you have like a flat roof building, you could pitch any direction. It's really more down to how much energy is being consumed by the building.
So for roofs mounted, you really want it to say equal to or less than the roof area of the structure on the lot.
Or just the structure. Yes. Yeah. That would be very simple.
Did you get that, Peter?
Accidentally limit someone with a small house.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
I don't necessarily, and for G, I just wasn't sure why we limited to 25% specifically
Footprint.
when we're looking at the institutional residents or care uses. I've actually done quite a few solar installations for nursing homes, things like that, transitional care. So for residential, this is not a problem. They're never going to be that big. It doesn't make sense. But for something like a nursing home, for example, there's a few in town I can think of where they could probably, if I had to guess, cover their entire parking lot with solar panels and still not be making enough power for the building. But because there's no other definition, they'd be limited to 25% of the footprint, even if they're going over already paved areas.
So you're talking like panels that go over parking. Is that what you're talking about? That's would be the same, treated the same way.
Under this, it would. So
So there should be a difference between commercial and residential.
Or is it more of an accessory structure that needs a conditional use permit? I thought that's what this was
generally, it would, but we've gotten into this thing here because this applies to both residential and institutional residents or care uses, which, I understand why they're in the same, or these are accessory uses to permitted residential uses.
Right, yeah.
So for like a single family home, this doesn't really apply. It doesn't, it's never going to, but, yeah, the 25% I assume we chose just to be
To
somewhat,
be accessory.
to be accessory.
Incidental and not be.
But again, from a personal perspective, I'd like to see that driven by the electrical usage of the site. So if they use a lot more power for providing for their residents or whatever institutional need they have, I don't say we'd want to limit them.
So should we do a different definition if it's ground mounted in a residential setting versus a commercial setting?
Well, if you look
I
at
think
the
it
table,
does.
if you get onto the table, I think this is what it was getting at, is this ground-mounted solar, it's got a conditional use permit. So installations that exceed the footprint area of the principal structure on a lot, or those installed as a principal use, is, I think, why they limited that.
Okay, so if you were over
if you're over the footprint area, you need a conditional use permit in those zones, or you're not allowed in other zones, but.
But there's no like,
There's nothing in residential.
well, you have it in SRA and SRB.
SRA and rural.
So it does what we're talking
SRB.
about, it limits it in residential and allows it with a conditional use permit outside residential.
Yeah, I guess this, for the earlier bit, it was really more about why we limited that to 25% of the footprint of the structure. Again, if that's necessary to be an accessory, it's probably not a huge deal. If we're talking like single
It's not a
family,
magic number, but it was meant to be, accessory is supposed to be incidental and not
Right.
transformative. So that's where it came from.
that probably makes sense then.
So for your nursing home, get a conditional use permit.
And you can make it bigger.
But in residential, you're limited to 25%.
Off the building, you know, in the yard.
Yeah, and then my only thought on the table was just there's a lot of zones, obviously, but there were a few where, no questions on the residential areas, but some of the character districts or other areas, again, this isn't gonna apply to most of these places, it's not gonna make financial or logical sense, but again,
To do ground mounted.
specifically the carport thing, which on a personal level, and I think in terms of land use, putting solar over existing paved areas seems like a really great use of space where you provide a benefit to the residents through shade, blocking water, blocking snow, generating power, and just an area that's already, you're not changing any of the runoff, any of that sort of stuff. But because we want to prohibit someone from getting rid of useful buildings and putting up a solar field in the middle of town, that makes sense. But we've accidentally prohibited the carport, which currently falls into ground mount because there's no other definition of it. Which to me, I would just say, putting something over an existing or planned paved area that does not prevent parking, something like that. Designed up to structural engineers, and some of these look really fancy, some of them are pretty basic, but
Accessory to existing parking use, basically, is what you're talking
yes,
about.
exactly. For example, I can just think of a lot of the residential stuff that we've looked at recently that's in some of these areas could easily utilize one of these with no negative impact to sight lines, building appearance, anything like that, and you all of a sudden gain a, clean power aspect to benefit the community or customers or whatever.
Do we have examples of people doing that, building carports just to support solar?
Yeah, I mean, it's a large part of what I do for my job, actually. I'm working on 2 hospitals down in New Jersey. I'm going to be there on Friday, probably.
All over Phoenix.
Yeah, and obviously there's quite a bit of it
All over Phoenix there,
in the.
is that kind of what they're,
I mean, all the parking lots in Phoenix have like
well, I'm talking about residential, like just,
a lot of them, yeah.
Yeah,
It gives them
apartment
shade from the
buildings or,
heat.
but in Portsmouth, is that gonna be a thing?
It's not going to be common. So because the land's very valuable, but again, if you're building the Portsmouth Green, for example, there's a big parking lot right in the middle, right there, right, and be relatively simple to. So, for example, there's nothing stopping me from building a carport there right now with no solar on it.
I think more residential though, I mean, would residential.
In like a single-family home,
Yeah,
no.
single-family home,
No,
I
It
don't
would
know
be-
if there'd be
Let's
enough
sort out
solar
the-
use.
that would be a really stupid money move. I would never recommend someone do that.
The Commerce Way development's gonna have hundreds of parking spaces. That could all be undercover with solar panels.
I mean, I'd have to look at the building, what people wanted to do, but that would be a prime example of somewhere where you could. I've just got a zoning permit in Bedford, actually, for existing carports it's on Iron Horse Drive, an apartment building, all of their common spaces, right? They have a pool, they have power for all of that, so we're putting solar panels on existing carports, actually, which is a little weird, but because there's parking, it's covered, it might as well do something while it's just sitting there. Which is why in some of these places, like some of the character districts and whatnot, it would obviously have to meet all the existing requirements of those districts. But if we say no ground mount, you accidentally prevent this thing that to me is one of the best.
Could Walmart put up a bunch?
And that's not
I have a question, so but if we're downtown and someone builds a parking garage, would we prevent them from doing ground mount on the top of the building?
I don't think it would be ground mount. I think it would be,
Building mount.
I don't think it would be roof mounted because it's
Roof mounted at that point?
mounted to the roof of the
You
building.
define it that way?
The new NEC is clarifying that, because that's actually a big point of contention.
I brought it up.
That's usually parking on the upper.
Right, it is, but could it be covered parking with solar
We would
panels, right?
consider that generally roof mount, yes.
I'm like, is it a roof or is it ground mount? That's why I'm asking.
It's not on the ground, is it on a roof?
Yes. But if there is no roof, yes.
If there is no roof, it creates the roof, right?
I think the question here is because generally, if 95% of the time, anecdotally or whatever, there's not an existing carport on which to mount the panels, you're building a carport upon which the panels are mounted, or they are the roof in this situation. And so, from a,
Oh, you're saying
The
that the
strict
panels
reading-
would be the roof and not, they wouldn't be mounted
there's not
on the
stuff
roof.
under it, and then you put the panels on. So that becomes, by definition, a ground-mounted system, which may be prohibited, I think somewhat accidentally, in some of these mixed-use or character district areas. Where I'm not saying, we should exempt it from the character district requirements, but you can make these as nice looking as you want. You can make one out of wrought iron if you wanted. I don't know, but just limiting them,
Altogether.
just
might
saying
be
no
an issue.
altogether seems just kind of unnecessary because we're trying to do one thing, which is stop massive solar fields from being developed, which doesn't make any financial sense in Portsmouth. But the land's far too valuable for that, and it doesn't provide anything. But
Do you see that? I mean, a lot of these structures are just the panels.
yes, yeah.
And they're not on top of it.
Yeah, for the most part, that's it's a lot of what I've been developing recently at work, I guess. But
I mean, it's what the city's looking at on the Jones Ave property, right? Is to do something that sits on the ground.
Yeah.
That's all panels. Ground mounted. Can I ask a question about the language around outside the HTC, inside the HTC? Because I find this very confusing, the way we're saying it's outside seems to actually read the same as inside. And am I missing something? I read it like 3 times and I swear that it says exactly the same thing.
I think I had input in that, but I don't remember.
I know.
couldn't find
Shall
it.
not be subject to the 33% limitation. Shall not be subject to the 33%.
It's a little more, another.
I think we've made them say the same thing, right, by striking that bit about
Right.
visibility.
But now when I read them, I just read the same thing over and over.
It does clarify, I think, an important point that people have asked about the HTC and solar. So
I just think we could do one line that says inside or outside.
Yep.
It's sort of my point.
save valuable ink. I do agree.
We could turn this into one line versus 2.
I have a kind of a bigger picture question about the mechanics of our zoning language. If we started talking about the F and G items, what tells the reader? It says here you can't do it. But then you go to a chart and it's a conditional use permit.
That's a good point.
Sometimes we put, except by conditional use permit, but. And, in certain zones, you have to say.
I've noticed this in other areas of the code, the ordinance, and
Yeah.
it just always bothered me. I'm like, boy, you kind of have to know the trick of this ordinance. Someone's got to tell you, like,
Yeah.
oh, just go to this part because
Yeah.
it takes away this part. I'm like, well, all right.
That's our job security.
That's what, that's why I go ask Peter.
This is why we keep asking for simplified and they don't give
We
it to
go
us.
straight.
It's job security.
No, that's a good point.
The other section that tripped me up was the number of units in a, just for your reference, the number of units in a building. Because we were arguing, like the zoning ordinance says like 24 units or something like that is the maximum in a building. And that's just the way it reads. And we were all arguing like, they're building all these buildings with more than 24 units. How are they doing it? And they're like, oh, if you go to this section.
Oh,
As a
You-
conditional
you
use
can
permit,
issue-
go make it bigger.
the gateway, and,
Yeah.
But if you read the language, it just says that's the
Yeah.
maximum.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yep.
I don't know, it doesn't seem to be
Conditional use permit, you
triggering
can go
like
up.
language.
The
And I-
incentives.
Yeah,
is what you're
and I know
talking about.
we've had people come before us that got that wrong. They've done stuff, because they assumed like, oh, it says the max 24.
Yep.
I'm like, keep reading.
read all 8,000 pages, whatever it is.
I don't know if you need to add something or if you want to keep the same format, because maybe if you add it here, then it's not other ways, it creates more confusion, but I find it confusing in general.
I'm trying to listen and research at the same time.
Just like
It's confusing.
Yeah, I just think that both A and B can be combined into one, because it does say the exact same thing. Just needs to say inside and outside the HDC.
I assumed it was opening up for future edits.
I think it's because of what the original edit was, and now it can just be simplified into one, in my mind.
Yeah.
And I think you can almost do the same thing up above with A, B, C, D. I believe that also could then be put into just -1, right there, yeah. Because with the changes that you made to the changes, they're now just saying the exact same thing.
Logan, it probably is not a huge deal, but do you ever see people play games with projected area versus sloped area?
In terms of the square footage of the panel versus the actual footprint, I've tried it. So no, I mean it's never going to matter that much. So
Because of all the setback requirements.
yeah, and generally, if you're mounting something on an existing sloped roof, it's almost always flush, and there's about a 1/4 inch gap between the panels, but they're flush, so there's no difference in the slope there. You can pitch up sometimes. So on a north roof, I've done it where it's a relatively small slope, and you pitch up from that north roof to get it facing south. But when you're looking at a flat roof, that can be a big difference. And the thing is, there's all sorts of there's racking that holds it down, so there is stuff in between those gaps. So in terms of coverage area, it's a lot simpler for me to just say I have 4,000 panels times X square feet, and here's your calculation board. There you go. If you're having to split hairs by saying, well, it's at 5 degrees, so technically, I've never seen it come down to that sort of thing. And again,
Just so I'm clear, like if you had a flat roof and you took like a 6-foot panel, real steep, boop, 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 it's just, you're gonna have to put them so far apart that you're not gonna get that mathematical or
Yeah.
whether you want it or not. I don't
usually,
wanna-
generally they're mounted either at 5 or 10 degree tilt, so not very high. I read an article about above the Arctic Circle, people doing stuff almost vertical because of the weird sun angles. That I don't see changing in Portsmouth. So unless something goes terribly wrong, I don't think our general azimuth is going to change that much. But generally they're flat-ish. They're usually not pitched up terribly high. So you kind of draw a box around everything, and that's
5 to 10 degrees, really?
yeah. Wind uplift becomes a huge problem the more you pitch them up, and so you either have to physically attach stuff to the building, which is more costly, or put a lot of weight on it.
Because there's a solar field in Exeter, like off of exit 10 or 9, one of
Yep.
those. I feel like that's steeper.
So if a field, yes, you're generally, ideally, you want to be at whatever the azimuth of the sun is. So at this latitude, what are we at, like 38 or something? That would be the ideal pitch.
That's what I was going to say. 13.
But that's already, I don't know.
I was gonna
Sure
say
you were,
40,
Tiff.
so I would have been a little.
It's in the 35 to 40 range, right? In northern Maine, it would be higher. Plus, that sheds snow better. But again, that's already physically attached to the ground. It's not flying away. But if that's on a roof,
Got
it
it.
is going to pick up and fly off the roof unless
Especially
it
with
is
some of the wind gusts we've had lately.
yeah,
it'll
unless
rip
it
the
is
roof off with it.
significantly held down. So on a roof, you really can't go very high.
They have to be almost flat to the roof.
And it depends on the parapet height and a lot of roof stuff. But yes,
Right.
generally on a roof they're pretty flat because otherwise they have to be way too heavy. So yeah, the angle's not ideal, but that's what you get.
I think we found, we're getting to where the,
To why
To why-
ours just
why-
says the same thing over and over.
Why it's the same?
yeah.
I mean, is it supposed to be the same?
No.
Because right now they are. So if they're supposed to be different, I think we need to change the wording.
I feel like I should get a professional development hour for my knowledge that I just learned about.
Yeah.
If that's the case, I'd be rich if I could claim for all the hours I give free fence.
38 degrees, by the way.
Was it 38?
Don't get into
No, I was
Yeah,
kidding.
we'll fix it.
I think he's just taking what you said.
There's supposed to be a difference. We'll find it and fix it.
Okay.
And bring it to the meeting.
Okay, because if not, you should just combine them.
Yeah.
It'll get wiped out, but there was supposed to be a difference, so.
Yeah, no, they read, I've read them like 6 times,
Yep.
they read identically the same.
I just did the same thing and I agree with you. That's not what it's supposed to be.
I thought it was
I
losing
mean,
my
if a
mind.
house is within the historic district and they're trying to get solar panels, wouldn't they have to go before the historic commission?
That changed recently too.
I'm sorry. Is this
You
a
had to
hot
ask
topic
that,
that
Yeah,
I,
we've
just brought
already
up?
solved that.
It's kinda, sorta, yeah.
Kinda, sorta, yeah.
That's good thought.
You think I'm bitter about the 6-foot, 8-foot fence, you shouldn't say about that one.
Uh-huh. The record,
Wait,
I'm
I
with
mean,
you guys
if
on
it's-
some of this.
If it's listed at, so if it's not a contributing building, does it have to? So it's like one of the,
Minimally visible, is that what the word is?
Right.
Minimally, yeah,
From the street.
From the street.
from the street.
From the street.
Minimally visible from the street, I
What is
believe is the
So
correct
that's
one.
the criteria they use, part of the criteria.
Y'all don't wanna know how many hours we talked about that one?
So,
is there a definition anywhere of minimally visible, or is it just a,
Yeah.
okay.
So are we going on to accessory dwelling units? Cause I almost cried when I read this, only because all that work we did got wiped out.
Well, I thought,
All
no,
the
we have
process?
parking first.
All the
Oh no,
design
parking we
stuff?
already did.
Oh,
No,
we
but
did
the other
parking?
part,
All the design,
Oh.
All the design stuff that I spent
Howard's
year.
design manual.
talking about,
Yeah.
it's all just been wiped out by the state.
Gotta love the state.
Oh, as
Well,
much
you know
as,
how it could
We
come
did
back.
something, so, you know.
so we shouldn't part away.
Size limitation. If conforming with that, it could be larger than 950 square feet.
I don't know.
Think about it.
I just wanted to say I shed a little
Yeah.
tear for all the work that went into creating the current ADU.
It took so long.
It took me a year plus. Yeah. Hey,
where
I'm
before
over.
ADUs, there is this one change to parking that,
Oh, because of the
State law
state change.
requires-
so
The state change, yeah.
the draft language is to just delete the over 750 and then make over 500 require one space and then leave less than 500 as half a space.
Okay.
Why not?
And is that
just
allowed
have-
under the state statute, the state law?
If you're exactly,
What if you're
if
500?
you're exactly 500.
Don't we always round up?
No, I'm just kidding.
Why don't we just make it one space for,
Okay, over 501?
It should be 500 or less.
Yeah, 500 or less. We'll change that.
Sorry.
Not less
That
than.
is helpful.
500 or less.
why don't just make it one, why don't just make it one space for, regardless of square foot?
I think it's where you divide by 0.
Because we were trying when we originally did that to make micro units not require so much
It's a
parking.
micro unit.
So if you have under 500 square foot units, you only need one parking space for every 2 units under 500 square feet. That was the point of why that was originally done. And we're allowed to require less, just not more. So the 1.3 is what we have to get rid of under the new state law.
All right, now ADUs.
Did committee talk about, did committee talk about this at all, Beth? The
Which-
state law changes?
Housing committee?
Yeah.
Not really. I don't think we have. No.
One of the things, and I'm not advocating this, I just want the board to be aware of this, but right now we require the owner to be a resident, to have an ADU. That is an option.
I think they need to be one.
I said, I was just gonna say what the option is. I wasn't gonna add,
I don't think it should be
You
an
mean a
option in the
resident of one of
city.
the two, the ADU or the principal?
but that's a municipal option. The city could say you don't have to.
Oh,
But I don't want to do that personally because having one of those be resident occupied is what allows this to not get out of control, especially for investors and in single family neighborhoods.
I agree. I just wanted
Yeah.
the board to be aware, it's an option.
It's one of the things that's made me comfortable with ADUs.
Yeah,
While it's an option, stick with it.
Hmm?
While it's still an option, don't change it.
yes.
Because they could have.
They could have just said you have,
Like everything else they did.
They'll probably change it at some point, but they haven't yet, so.
Yeah.
So we reviewed this with legal and that's, came up with this draft. One of the big things is the size. It can't be less than 750.
right, so our 600 square foot units had to go away.
Right.
Attached, yeah.
We had detached ones.
And then you can, the municipality can make it up to 950 or even greater than that if they want. But right now, our cap is 750. And that's what we've been telling people.
And that's what they've been doing.
And that's what they've been doing.
We talked about it when we changed this the first time to make it bigger, and we got a lot of pushback on larger because it was like having two single-family homes side by side. And 750 square feet is a pretty big two-bedroom unit for most people, so. That's the reason, just giving the rest of the group the reason why we did not opt to go bigger, because we could have gone bigger the last time too.
So that's what legal has presented, our options, their size, and ownership. Ownership, leave it
And
as
we
it
can
is.
have a say on how it looks, so we don't have to,
Right.
we can't keep them actually looking like so part of our reason for putting in all that was to make them look either subservient to the principal residence or at least make it look like it's just still one house, and we can't do any of that anymore.
And basically, the change in the law is you have to treat this, you can't have any more restrictions on the ADU than you would a single-family home. You gotta, so it's basically,
You're still allowed to bring it before the HDC.
right.
Because it's
And it's in the HCC, it's got to.
Because a single-family home would
It's
go
in
to
the
the
historic
HDC.
district,
Wetlands.
yeah. Or the wetlands.
Architecturally, it doesn't have to conform to the master house any longer.
Correct.
Right.
And
I'm a little
Or be-
disappointed
or be
about
set
that.
back a little, or.
and there's no way now we can have an ADU inside the HDC where the house is not.
The house is not what?
There's no way now, because of the changes we talked about earlier, you can't have an ADU inside the historic district with the principal home not.
In the historic district, I see, sorry.
Yeah, I think you're right.
One in,
But the
one
new
out.
changes, that won't happen because
Yeah.
any
There's no
lots that are
splitting.
divided are gonna be full lots, so yeah.
Yeah.
The ADU would be in the HDC or
It's
not.
actually very helpful then, yeah.
Yeah.
That does actually make this very helpful.
That would give the historic district, the historic commission power to say like, that ADU doesn't look right, essentially.
If it's
And
still in
have
the,
some say over the architecture of the ADUs
for
in
the
that.
lots, for the lots inside the HDC, yes.
Just to complete that thought.
So suddenly all of Portsmouth becomes a historic district.
If we didn't change things and the ADU was, but the principal house wasn't, the state law would say you can't have any more restriction from the principal house, right?
Right, so could we then, yeah, I think it's best we make these HGC changes.
Actually,
Sooner rather than later.
Anyways, that's where my head went.
Yeah.
It's a good point. I don't know how it's worded. If it's worded that the HDC, you can have your own controls, but, or if it's on the principal house.
Tony just gave a lawyer a really good way around the.
I want a PDH.
So let's change that HGC soon.
Do we know how many of these we have?
ADUs,
Yes.
we do. I think it's like,
There's a spreadsheet of them, I know
I
that.
know, I have a spreadsheet and I don't know the number.
it's on the website, I remember looking at it, it was
Somewhere,
stuff about it.
it's around 20.
I can tell you after-
Right at 20.
I can tell you that we were only getting like 1, 2, and 3 in the first few years this was enacted. And when we changed it, that bumped up by a lot. We were actually getting in a lot more requests, so that's the good news, is the first changes got a lot more of them in, but maybe this will get even more.
I think we have seen a little bit of a pickup for sure since the conditional use permit went away.
Except now we don't see it as a planning board. We're not gonna see these. And anyone we've said no to now gets to do whatever they want.
Unless they're within the historic district. so
Correct.
all of Portsmouth becomes a historic
The
district.
historic district is
Okay.
so tight on land anyways,
Yeah.
that it's gonna be really hard for anyone to like do a new
Yeah.
attached anything.
They wouldn't necessarily have to go before the HDC if they put it into
In-
an accessory dwelling or into the main structure. It's
Right.
only if they build something new.
Right. Because of the existing structure, if you're not changing anything on the outside, you can do it on the inside, so.
There's no, it's only exterior changes.
Is there anything in our regulations that impede doing more, that inhibit doing more? This seems like a bigger idea than it is
Doing more.
happening.
Doing more of what?
More ADUs. 20 seems like a very
It's
small number.
cost.
Anything else that we could do to encourage it? Is that the other side of that question?
In the regulations, yes.
No, because what impedes it is cost, is what I've talked
State
to a lot
just
of
did
people.
I think
Yeah,
we
the
have
state just
34
opened it
ADUs
up.
since 2015.
I think maybe the size. You can go to, they say, they suggest 750 to 950. You could bump the 750 up to a higher number as a max if you wanted to. That may, but I don't think it's that enticing.
But it
what
wouldn't
you're
be
talking
that we could do a conditional use permit if they're gonna get bigger, so
Not-
we'd be allowing people to do almost 1,000 square feet by right.
I think a bigger question is, how many people want to do this but can't, and why can't they?
I
So
can
don't
tell you
know
the
that
people
there's-
I've talked to it's mostly been cost.
It's expensive.
But I don't
It's
know.
expensive.
I mean, we all have different, groups, people. I don't know any of my friend group that have even like saying, hey, I'm gonna build an ADU, or I wish I could. I literally don't know anybody.
I
that-
know a lot of people who wish there were more
Yeah,
because young people
There were more.
could,
Yeah.
then move into a garage apartment or something like that.
So Anthony, I've looked into it myself actually because I have a paved parking spot. I have a driveway and this weird paved thing. So I was like, this could work. And it's just the cost. I mean, I don't have.
It's having the extra cash to
I'm
actually
not saying
build
they don't
it.
exist.
You gotta be
I'm
on the
saying-
planning board a couple years and then you'll have
Yeah.
I'm saying we don't know the number of people like yourself who've run into some impediment. And so 30, if it was 40 people that have wanted it, only 30 something did it, I think we're doing pretty well. But if it's like 500 people that wanted it,
Oh,
we
yeah.
only did 30, that's not doing well. So
I just don't see much in here that would have ever bothered someone looking to do that much.
We had an applicant that wanted to also have like a work from home space. Didn't we?
We fixed that. Because you can do, you're
Home
talking about the
occupation.
one that wanted to teach the arts.
Well, right, like, if you're gonna do construction, right, okay, I can build 750 square feet, but if I could do not only an ADU, but have something I can work out of during the day,
Studio or whatever.
now it's like, maybe it starts to make more sense.
I think you're talking about the one we turned down on Lafayette. Because they had a two-car
more
garage they
specific
were
than-
building, and they were building an office on the back side of the garage, and then an ADU over it. I know the garage has been built. But I don't know if they ever,
I thought we.
we asked them to come back with changes, and they never did. They withdrew their application. But I drive by it every day. This is the only reason why I watched it. I drive by it every day. I'm like, oh no, the garage has been built. And I can tell you it looks just like the plans, so.
Financing problem, Beth?
There is sometimes financing problems because that's technically ends up being a construction loan, which are not easy for everyone to get through. So yes, we talked to banks about doing maybe special financing or HELOCs to try to build these. I mean, it's complex, and when you're talking about, the equity, the financing piece, and every personal decision, unless you've got the cash lying around, it can be hard to create these, right? That's what it boils down to. And construction is still not cheap, not to mention the fact is, if you're gonna have to do any construction, finding anyone to do it has also been a problem. So I think that there's more complications than just our zoning.
Yeah, I was going to say is maybe this part of the master plan is like, do residents feel like we're doing enough to promote it, or where are they finding roadblocks?
Nope.
I see that number and it doesn't mean anything to me. I don't know if it.
I can tell you I think that's great, because in the first 3 years, we probably had less than 5, right?
We had
3.
11 so far in 25. We had 18 in 24.
Which was right after we passed the changes.
Is this approved or built?
That is a
Approved,
really
probably.
difficult.
Yeah, it's probably just approved.
Approved, yeah.
4 in 23.
Yep. And the numbers go way down.
7 and 22, 5 and 21, 2 and 20, 9 and 19.
I think that was right after it first happened.
5 and 8.
We had
So
quite a few at the influx, but then it tapered way down. And a lot, so we actually had these focus groups where we talked to architects, engineers about the ADU specifically. And honestly, I was a little shocked when they came back and they're looking at me, they're like, no, you have the best law than anyone around here. You've like done the best. And I'm like, but ours isn't good. We're trying to make it better. And you're not helping me by not telling me anyone else does it better. So we did spend a lot of time changing it. Now most of it's wiped away, which is fine. And we don't have administrative approval anymore. We don't have notices anymore. People can just do them as long as they fit the statute, right? And you guys get to review that part, right?
yeah, they need a building permit.
Right, okay. So that's how you do it, is through the
They
building
need
permit.
They need an affidavit that testifies that they will own or occupy one
Owner
of the
occupy.
units. And they have to renew that as a certificate of use every year.
And the idea behind that is to keep investors from buying them up and renting them all out, especially as Airbnbs, which is what we were trying to prevent.
Well, there's not an adequate ROI with free land, which is surprising. Well, the
What are we
return,
talking about?
the return on your investment, if you own a piece of land and you can put a little building on it and rent it,
The building itself is just pricey.
It's
really
the building itself
It's
to build it.
The cost of building it is the problem.
This is maybe a dumb question, but I was just thinking again about the whole owner occupancy thing. I know a lot of homes are technically owned by trusts, not actually.
Trusts are pass-throughs.
Okay,
We-
so-
We
okay.
put trusts and LLCs into the ordinance at one point.
And then someone who's part of that has to live.
So
Okay, that
a
makes
trustee,
Member of the trust,
grantor,
a member of
or
the trust, yeah.
a more than 50% owner of the LLC has to live there. Yeah.
That makes sense.
We actually had that problem come up and we had to fix that on the fly.
I hadn't realized until somewhat recently how many homes are that way. And I was like, oh, that's
It's to avoid probate.
yes.
It's a very important step, avoiding probate. I tell everyone to do it.
Tony, this might, I mean, we have, in our tracking, we have, when people come in, we have an ADU potential file folder. And then if they move to like applying and getting approved, we move them out of that. And we only have 9 in that folder of potential ADUs, people that have like come in and asked about it, but haven't applied.
Well, this is House Bill 577, right? So maybe the state legislature needs to do more. If they're well-intentioned in wanting to,
But I think that's what these changes were to do.
municipalities have to.
I think we have to see if these changes do make that change.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point.
I think the legislator will stay out of zoning, but
Well, standard zoning, but we talked about the financing, right, the
Financing,
challenges there. These are probably subordinate loans to the,
Trust me, there's no money out there on a state or federal level that's gonna help people right now for the ADUs. There just isn't.
well-intentioned,
so.
give them that.
I mean, if somebody, but let's talk about outside the box. If somebody wanted to actually rent a unit, build it and rent it for a period of time, maybe under 79E, that could be then a request to a housing trust that we happen to have for a small amount of money that they then in turn get that money, but they rent it out at, true HUD levels for a period of time. So we could look at a twist on ADUs that way. Just throwing out an out of the box idea.
Do we use 79E?
No, but we're that's one of the many things that we're exploring right now.
I can't imagine
We were
a
waiting.
single property owner handling all the paperwork for
Right.
one unit. Couldn't imagine them doing that. Maybe.
I don't think they'd have to. It'd be like, so any owner right now that has units, they're usually managed through an outside firm. So those could be managed by a third party.
We have to go through the, one more item, right?
No, that was the end, isn't it?
Isn't it the,
Multifamily and
commercial
commercial.
district?
So that goes into effect in July, so we have some time with that. But we started reviewing this with legal, and it was kind of more nuanced than
It's not complicated.
to trying to bring something forward. So we'll continue to work on that.
Yeah, because this one doesn't go into effect until sometime next year, right?
July 2026. So.
Right, so we have 3/4 of a year almost.
It would take that long.
You'll be here tomorrow.
Right.
So we talked about some of the other things I was going to talk about. The one that keeps coming up every single meeting is our wetlands conditional use permit. And back to the conversation we had at the beginning, the way we're doing it is the way I think we should be doing it, where if people are improving things, they should get a permit, but that's not what our ordinance says. Back to Tony's point, if you're buying property, you say, well, you can't do anything in the 100-foot buffer, you're gonna have to restore it, and, you know. That's not really the way it's been working. But I don't wanna propose, I don't wanna propose that, another conversation with the Conservation Commission.
They've
Get
been
their
talking
input.
about it too, every,
So
chance we get, we've been talking to the chair about that, they're interested.
if there's appetite with the board,
I think we should, our
We should
zoning
address it.
ordinance should actually be based off of what our practice has been.
it should.
Do you foresee any zoning that would not, inside the buffer, that would not require going to the Conservation Commission? Could we write something? Do you foresee something like that?
Like an administrative permit deal?
Or just have it come to the planning board?
That's possible. I hadn't thought about that, but that's possible.
And what, I guess I need a situation, like, in what
Let's say,
situation?
the example we showed on the screen earlier, like, hey, if you take 50 feet off, you're built 100 feet into the buffer, if you do 50 feet off, and restore that land, you don't have to go to the Conservation Commission.
The details of restoring that land.
I was gonna say, as a planning board member, I want the Conservation Commission to tell me what would be the appropriate
I was thinking
restoration.
things that
Maybe they
wouldn't
could
be
write,
good
maybe they
either.
could write something though that does it, that says that. I don't know. I'm not a.
I was thinking more, so for instance, when somebody is looking for feedback about how to maintain an existing buffer that's built into partially, they could just go to the Conservation Commission and get their feedback about how to do that without having to come to us if they don't
What you
need
raised
further
is the
approval.
administrative permit question, which is a good conversation with the Conservation Commission. So
Sure.
if Peter and I, because he's always the Conservation Commission, have that conversation with the commissioners, see how they feel about it. Do you see a way for an administrative permit that might involve just the commission or just the planning board and
You do
director?
two things when you do that. One is you shorten the permitting process,
Right.
which save costs, which reduce housing prices. The second is, especially on the affordable housing piece, they have deadlines to apply for affordable housing funds, the 9% and the 4%. And so the way it always works is the design team's in a rush trying to get through, and so they have to map out every single meeting and how are we going to get to this date. And it's a challenge, and so the easier we can make that without giving up, environmental concerns, we've improved the process, we've theoretically reduced the cost of housing without a lesser product. So that's where my mind goes.
I'm not gonna ask you how you know that.
It's the reason I'm gray hair.
I would support that as long as it also further protects the wetlands.
Yeah,
Like we can get through a process more efficiently without diminishing impact.
the intent of the existing wetlands ordinance is spot on. It's perfect. It's really, the intent is great. And I think, I agree, we need to make sure that we're protecting the environment and enhancing it where we can. That's what we need to be doing. Just making sure the ordinance says the
We
same
looked at
thing.
a piece of property for that project that needs some improving along the wetland.
The last thing I had, and I'm gonna close the meeting, was building footprint. What happened with that at council? I heard it got shot down. Was that too big a?
I do remember it got shot down, but I don't remember why. Sorry.
I think I mentioned the M word, McIntyre,
Oh,
for the building
yes,
footprint, for the
yes,
for the deletion of
Yes, yes, now it's all coming back to
that
me.
was,
Just because of the
So we're
deletion
calling that
language?
now.
well, but then I think that the council was questioning about the 10,000 square feet.
Right,
And-
they had more questions than we had answers for, and I think it should be something we send be talked about during the master plan. I think that would be the best way to get it forward.
Should there be more of a discussion with council, do you think?
How long ago's that meeting? I need to rewatch that whole section. I've
That
been
was,
through so much since then. I
It
can't
was in
remember.
September.
So, believe it or not, I've been through a lot since then. Oh wait, that was the one I lost my voice and I
Yeah,
couldn't
yeah, you
talk.
couldn't talk.
That was September 24th. I remember that meeting. Go watch that meeting. I can't talk. You can laugh at me like all my fellow councilors did all night.
Okay.
It's not raining.
I,
so-
you know, I think they were open to, they were wrestling with if they denied it, or sent it back. I think they were opening to the planning board working on it further and maybe coming back with
Right.
something.
So I think we need to go back and
What we-
remember their concerns and then try to address them.
Fair enough.
Sorry, that was that long ago. There's been a whole election since then. I'm a little
We've got a
tired.
lot going on. I'm gonna adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will not be here Wednesday.
Sorry.